The center staff and I are especially grateful to Unju Pacifici and Terry Church for organizing these events with us. For those of you in the audience who are new to our events, so let me just say a few words about the East Asian Studies Center. It has been part of the USC community since 1975. The center is home to over 120 affiliated faculty across 40 departments and schools. As you can see, interdisciplinary diversity is our strength. So in addition to the regulatory science series, we also have many other programs that we all really welcome you to join. So for example, we launched a new series called Race Solidarity, Trans-Pacific Conversation. This is intended to provide a platform for faculty and students to engage with a host of social and cultural issues related to race and racism on both sides of the Pacific. So as many of you know, racism against Asian Americans is on the rise due to the pandemic. So we do have quite a lot of colleagues who try to address this, and also in relation to the racial reckoning that's happening across the nation today. So I do hope that some of you could join us for some of these events. And in fact, our another major event, it's on February 24th, in which we will feature a panel of professional playwrights discussing Asian and Black cultures at the theater. So I hope that you could join us for that. Now for today, I'm very pleased to welcome back Unju and Terry to help us understand traditional Chinese medicine and Western regulations. So let me introduce them in a more formal way. Dr. Unju Pacifici is Associate Professor and Chair of Regulatory and Quality Sciences in the School of Pharmacy at USC. She is also the Associate Director of the D.K. Kim International Center for Regulatory Science that specializes in generating knowledge, tool, and skills for the development of innovative, safe, and effective biomedical products. Dr. Pacifici received her PharmD and PhD in toxicology from USC. After graduation, she worked at Amgen and gained experience in conducting clinical research with special focus on Asia, Pacific, and Latin America region. So working with clinical and regulatory staff in Japan, China, Taiwan, and Mexico, Dr. Pacifici was responsible for aligning local efforts with US activities in therapeutic product development. Her additional professional experiences include community pharmacy practice in various settings and clinical pharmacy practice at the Hospital of the Good Samaritan in Los Angeles. Our second speaker is Dr. Terry Church. He's Assistant Professor in Regulatory and Quality Sciences in the School of Pharmacy at USC. He is Associate Director of Undergraduate Education and teaches in the undergraduate degree program, the Pharmacology and Drug Development. Dr. Church received his Doctor of Science and Master of Science in Regulatory Science from USC. And he's also has a Master in Cultural Anthropology and a BA in Social Sciences. So he's a Renaissance man. Professor Church's academic focus is on interdisciplinary application of pharmaceutical regulation in relation to patterns of addiction, disaster management, and education and training. He is also an avid supporter of creative arts therapies and was involved in the initial setup of the Institute of Arts in Medicine at USC. Dr. Church is a faculty fellow at the USC Center for Excellence in Teaching and co-chair of the Educational Committee of the Institute for Addiction Sciences. Without further ado, please join me in welcoming both Dr. Pacifici and Dr. Church.
Thank you. Thank you for the very warm welcome. Welcome, everyone. Just a couple of housekeeping notes. If you have questions throughout, we'd love to hear from you. So please go ahead and raise your hand, and we will call on you probably towards the end of the presentation. But once you raise your hand, it will remain until it gets wiped away by you. So it'll just be a good record for us to know that there are questions so that we will be able to answer them for you. With that being said and out of the way, welcome. We are very excited to be able to offer this talk to you today on Eastern medicines and Western regulations. We will be going through a little bit of history, a little bit of the scientific use of both traditional drugs and practices, and also looking at how these things are regulated in the US, and ultimately ending with a discussion on how we can balance the two going forward in terms of medicine. So many of you are probably aware that Buddhism, as well as traditional healing practices of India, really dispersed themselves into parts of Asia uh, beginning around 340 BCE. And it's believed that the start to traditional Chinese medicine really has its roots in this transition of Buddhism into China. What we see is that these practices look very distinctive once they take on the Chinese traditional medicine title. We see a whole series of introductions of different tenets, including things like qi and looking at meridians of electricity and movement of energy through the body. We also have the Nijing, which is the oldest still practiced traditional book on medicine in the world. Taoism definitely had its influences, and I won't belabor it by going through each of the different phases of the medicine practices, but it was very influential and incorporated a lot of the philosophy into traditional Chinese medicine. The oldest and most consistently used medical text, the Nanjing, is really a look at how to preserve one's health. And throughout the series of Chinese history, it underwent a few major revisions, and a few of them are listed here. The Six Dynasties period, for example, incorporated a systematic response by looking at how to formalize diagnosis. The Sui dynasty brought in acupuncture for the first time. The Tang dynasty really solidified the Taoist influence, and the Han dynasty was a little odd in terms of what it added to the Nanjing, but exorcisms as well as drug therapy became utilized in conjunction with acupuncture. The other aspects of the traditional Chinese medicine that were incorporated in this period included Chinese alchemy. And many people oftentimes think of that as looking for the elixir of life, but in reality, it was the first pharmacopoeia in practice. So it's looking at how we compound different medicines, how we try to accumulate all of this vast knowledge of plants and animals into something that's useful based off of diagnosis. One of the other big additions to this was Qigong, or the practice of life energy cultivation. All of this culminated in an idea of a medical system that really focused on the yin and the yang of health. You have things like the exterior, which we can all see. So that's skin, hair, flesh, and the interior, things that we can't see, the organs, bone marrow, qi, and blood. And this defined through 8 different principles the way that Chinese medicine would be utilized. On top of these diagnostic and therapeutic techniques, we see the incorporation of traditional Chinese medicine through herbs. And there's a heavy reliance on the use of herbs as the healing practice or the central modality of traditional Chinese medicine. Many of these remedies represent polypharmacy, meaning that they're multiple drug combinations. And as you can see, each herb has its specific utility in the compounding of these medications. So the chief herb is the one that's going to do the bulk of the work, and it has deputies, assistants, and envoys to assist in the process. So at this time, I'd like to invite Dr. Pacifici to walk us through how these products get regulated in the United States. Dr. Pacifici?
Thank you, Dr. Church. It is really a pleasure to be with all of you this evening. I see from the participants list some familiar names, our students, and as well as some of our instructors. So really excited to see our regulatory science family joining us this evening, and we'll invite you to chime in and contribute your areas of expertise as we go on. So you know, I grew up in Korea, and so a lot of what Dr. Church um, described, um, we kind of, I grew up with, without really understanding that there is a whole, you know, a philosophy behind it, or theory behind it. It was for us just way of life, and maybe those of you who are from the Asian culture share that experience as well. I can still smell my grandmother, you know, preparing the traditional medicine, because it was always prepared and boiled, and it always had that very distinct aroma to it. So my grandmother would go down to the herbalist, and depending on what ails her, or you know what she wanted to provide to her family members, she would come back with some concoction, and and then start boiling it, and you know, it is really by trial and error, or you know, power of the observation. Things like ginseng and other herbs were never it was never a practice to boil them in a metal cookware. It always had to be a ceramic cookware. And so I, you know, now as a pharmacologist and a pharmacist, I often wonder if there were some, you know, oxidizable or chelatable active component that gets morphed into, you know, an inactive substance in a metal cookware. So it always had to be either in a glassware or some kind of an earthenware. That's how you prepared it. So we kind of, you know, embodied it without really even knowing where it originated from. So, and even now, in countries in Asian culture, the traditional Chinese medicine is integrated into the healthcare system. So in China, for example, about 1/5 of patients choose TCM doctors as their first choice. About 1/4 of patients would like to treat their illnesses through TCM first. So one of the questions that we got that was submitted by one of the participants was, how are TCMs regulated in China? So in China, the Chinese Regulatory Authority oversees TCM to ensure quality of these products. And Professor Church mentioned something about the Chinese pharmacopoeia. Well, the Chinese pharmacopoeia has over 1,600 TCM preparations. So, but you know, it is still challenging to establish the safety and efficacy of these products because of the complex nature of these products, as well as the way that TCM is practiced. So for a while, clinical trials were being required for TCM in China, but from the latest literature and publications by the government, it looks like those requirements are being considered to be too burdensome and are being eased. So the current emphasis seems to be on the quality standards and animal testing to demonstrate safety of TCM products in China. So in the United States, the FDA, or the Food and Drug Administration, regulates therapeutic products. Next. And this is how FDA is organized. You can see the commissioner, who used to be Stephen Hahn, but those are our political appointments. And so now we are waiting for the new commissioner to be named. Currently, the interim commissioner is the head of the center director for the drug part of FDA, Janet Woodcock. She's the interim head. And so we'll see who's going to be the permanent commissioner of the FDA within the next few weeks or few months. So you can see the little circles on the bottom, those designate the centers within the FDA that focus on a particular product. So CIFSAN focuses on food and dietary supplements, as well as cosmetics. CDER drugs, CDRH, devices, CBER, biologics. And then there's also the Center for Veterinary Medicine for animal products. Next, please. So FDA, from its organizational structure, you can see that FDA is organized into product categories. And so the product categories are food, dietary supplement, cosmetic, drug, biologic, device, and even tobacco products. What you don't see is a category called TCM. So there isn't a separate category for TCM in the United States. In general, a TCM product can be placed into one of 3 product categories: food, dietary supplement, or drug. And depending on where it is placed, there are specific requirements and restrictions for the product. And in the next slide, you can see some of the products can be marketed as food. So you can see in this picture, there are seeds and nuts, dried fruits, roots, barks. So for example, ginseng and as well as ginger are both roots, and there are other items there you can see. So the advantage of taking the food regulatory path is that a company does not need to have the product undergo pre-market review or approval by the FDA. So as long as the company complies with all the food regulations for manufacturing and labeling, it can go ahead and market the product. Okay. The disadvantage is that the company cannot make any therapeutic claims for the product, like prevent, treat, diagnose, or cure. If your food product makes those therapeutic claims, then it will be considered a drug, and it will need to go through the drug regulatory requirements that demonstrate quality, safety, and efficacy. And that's a very burdensome process. So what does food products have to do? Well, they have to be properly labeled, right? So, the FDA does not approve food label, but the companies have to make sure that their labeling complies with the FDA requirements. So this is to provide the consumers with accurate and truthful information that would help them make healthy choices, because FDA's mandate is to protect public health. So right now, this is an example of nutrition facts. So every food product, like can of beans or box of cereal, should have this label. And this label is mandated by the law to be a certain size. There's a font, so the size of the font, the order of ingredients, all the elements that are there are required by the law. And so you have to comply with that very closely. Okay. So next time you go to the market, go ahead and pick up the food items. And if it's food, it'll say nutrition facts. If it's a dietary supplement, it would say supplement facts. If it's an over-the-counter drug, it would say drug facts. Sometimes you might pick up a dietary supplement and you might say, is this drug or dietary supplement? The easiest way to find that out is by looking at the label. If it says supplement facts, then you know it's a dietary supplement. Same thing with food and dietary supplements. Sometimes, it's not so easy to figure that out just by looking at it. So we're undergoing a new change. We're transforming from the old label to the new label. And you can see these changes are really designed to prompt the American public to make healthier choices in terms of their food consumption. So you can see that the new items include more prominent, bold, and larger fonts with regards to calories. But then you also can see that the serving size is prominently featured so that people can understand how many servings a package represents. And in addition, you can see that the daily values have been updated based on the latest recommendations. If a company fails to comply with all the regulatory requirements, it can get into trouble, usually through warning letters being sent to the company. You can see here a warning letter was issued to a food trading company. And these warning letters are publicly available on the FDA website, as you see on the next slide. From this list, you can see some of the common problems that food manufacturers run into. So often it's for not adhering to quality manufacturing standards, which put them in the category of being adulterated. Or they are not adhering to the labeling requirements. Either their labeling that is not properly configured, or sometimes if they do not disclose certain allergens. So that's another requirement. They have to state if it contains milk or nuts, so that the public can be aware. This is kind of a newer requirement, the Foreign Supplier Verification Program. It's because so much of the food is imported from abroad that there is a new requirement called, to make sure that the foreign suppliers are also compliant with US regulatory requirements. So if you're a company and you want to sell the TCM through the food regulatory mechanism, these are things that you want to be aware of. Traditional Chinese medicines can also be marketed through the dietary supplement pathway. And so dietary supplement pathways is interesting because sometimes when you go to the supermarket and you see herbal medications or vitamins, you might say, that looks like a drug, and because they're usually in the form of pills or capsules. But under the Dietary Supplement Health and Education Act, or we call it DSHEA, dietary supplements are kind of placed under the umbrella of food, which put them under a different regulatory mechanism than drugs. Okay, and the under dietary supplements, you can have vitamins and minerals, botanical or herbal products, amino acid products. So the bodybuilders like to take amino acid products, or enzyme supplements. Okay, now dietary supplements cannot contain anything that may have a significant or unreasonable risk of illness or injury. So they cannot have anything harmful in there. They cannot have, lead or anything that could be harmful. The other thing is that dietary supplements cannot contain drug ingredients. Okay, so just because you say you are a dietary supplement, if you contain a drug ingredient, you automatically fall in the category of being a drug. Now, many dietary supplement companies get into trouble in this arena because they are enriched. Sometimes they dietary supplements have drug ingredients added into the product, and they can get into trouble as a undeclared drug ingredient. So the FDA rule of thumb is that drugs are usually considered unsafe until proven safe. Supplements are considered safe until proven unsafe. That is to say, dietary supplements do not need to be reviewed by the FDA before they go on the market. So for supplements and approvals, if there is a new dietary ingredient, FDA has a mechanism for to be notified and review before the product gets on the market. If it's an existing ingredient, you can go ahead and just market the product. Now, these are for ingredients. For herbal medications, it's different. The herbal supplements, it's different because there is really no particular ingredient usually herbal medications, say like ginkgo or some kind of a plant extract. So in those cases, they won't be considered a new ingredient or even a dietary ingredient. So that's how also the companies can bypass this process of notifying FDA of a new dietary ingredient.
So one thing to also keep in mind is that there is a misconception related to natural medicine, that it is somehow inherently better than synthetic medicine. And just because it has the title natural does not necessarily mean that it is better. And we can see this through a number of different things that we're about to show you. The supplements oftentimes pose a much higher risk or anticipated level of risk because these products are oftentimes untested and unregulated. They also tend to provide claims of efficacy that are sometimes based on really weak data or not rigorously reviewed data. And oftentimes people complain that the instructions just aren't as easy to follow. And the guidelines for what would be effective or safe, oftentimes the amount that they're telling you to take can be dangerous, and it can be misrepresented on the label with the amount that you should be taking. So just a few safety concerns.
So, in terms of, if you guys are wondering, if some of you are wondering, how safe are traditional Chinese medicine? As I mentioned, I grew up with our family members, even now, who are in Korea, they are preparing and consuming traditional Chinese medicine. We saw that maybe a quarter of the population on a regular basis in China are consuming, and we're not hearing of huge mortality rates that are going up because of traditional Chinese medicine. But you also still want to know, right? So as Professor Church mentioned, TCM could pose risks to people's health. So this 2015 article provides a review of safety concerns associated with these products. So there are intrinsic toxicities. What does that mean? That means that, some of these products, and you may be familiar with some of these products already by name, but some of these products are some of the products that are represented by traditional Chinese medicine have been used for centuries because they have a pharmacologic effect. Okay, and so intrinsic toxicity are associated with biological activities of the product. Okay, and many of these products have potent and powerful effects on various physiological systems. So for these products, it is really important to understand the therapeutic window or the safe dose range for using these products, because what differentiates a drug from poison is often just the dose. And so you can see the intrinsic toxicities that are represented by these products across the different physiologic system, liver, kidneys, heart, neurologic and gastrointestinal, and some are carcinogenic as well. So that's to keep in mind. But then a lot of things are carcinogenic, so I wouldn't be too worried about it. There are then extrinsic toxicities. Extrinsic toxicities refer to contaminations or adulterations, where we find things that shouldn't be there, like heavy metals, like lead, pesticide residues because many of these products are harvested in the field, and in the process of growing these plants, the pesticides were used that shouldn't be used. You're going to have residues or microbial presence, and that could be due to the way that it was stored or transported, and that could be dangerous because then you can have potential infections from those. So a well-controlled manufacturing process would be essential to minimize these effects. And actually, the Chinese government has what's called good agricultural practice for Chinese traditional medicine.
So if we take a moment to look at how supplements are used in the United States, the data that you see here on screen is provided through the NHANES, or the National Health and Nutrition Examination Survey. And what this is showing is data from 2018, 2019. They haven't quite gotten last year's data up and running, so we'll work with this. It's probably pretty accurate and is holding to be the same. What we can say is that predominantly women are using supplements more so than men. On average, we're spending about $30 billion annually on supplements. It's been reported that roughly 68% of all adults in the United States have reported taking at least one supplement for a period of 1 week. And as can be expected, as you age, you are more likely to take supplements. And the reasons for those are quite common across the board. Everything from to help you feel better, all the way through to weight management. And this series of surveys oftentimes changes with the trends in the population. So it's kind of interesting to look at over time at what are the major concerns that the population are trying to use supplements to help overcome. In terms of what we typically purchase in the United States, these are the 4 main categories of what typically gets purchased the most for supplements. So you have your multivitamins, your fish oil, calcium, vitamin C, and vitamin D. And each of these have their own set of urban myths related to why they would be useful, but some things we can say that are useful, like vitamin C, will help boost your immunity. And vitamin D obviously is required for you to be able to absorb the calcium that you're taking. So if you're not taking the vitamin D and calcium together, you're just creating expensive urine on the back end. But those are the most used supplements in the United States.
So we have so far heard about TCMs marketed as food. Then we heard about TCMs marketed as dietary supplement. TCMs in the United States can also be marketed as drugs. So in 2020, FDA approved the only drug in the United States to treat severe malaria, Artisan. And this actually product originated from Artemisia annua, which is a well-known traditional Chinese medicine. And in fact, this product was developed by Dr. Tu Youyou, and she helped to develop this product to be used as an anti-malarial. And in 2015, she received a Nobel Prize for her findings. So this product has been used for many decades in China against malaria, but it was only approved in 2020 in the United States. So you can kind of see how long it has taken for traditional Chinese medicine to be introduced in the United States. And you can see that the vial looks nothing like the plant. While if you were to go in China or many of the Asian countries and you walk into a traditional Chinese medicine pharmacy, you see the plant. Maybe it's dried up. But in the United States, we don't really, sell our drugs as plants until recently, I guess, maybe cannabinoids. So we'll see what happens with that. And another product is the next slide, is the arsenic trioxide. So arsenic has a long history in the United States. It was used before antibiotics were available. But then since then, we haven't really been using arsenic as a therapeutic because arsenic is very poisonous. In fact, you see, you hear about it in like Greek tragic plays of poisoning by arsenic. But in China, they have been using arsenic as a therapeutic for at least 2,000 years. So this is a clear example of a product, an ingredient that, depending on the dose, can be used to poison somebody or can be used to treat somebody. So this has been approved in 2000 for cancer treatment. So it has a long history in China. In 1992, a group of Chinese doctors reported that they were able to use this for a particular type of leukemia, as well as blood and bone marrow cancer, and had really surprisingly high cure rate. And so that was further developed and eventually got approved in the United States as a new drug.
Not all of these drugs are beneficial in terms of what we would think of as something useful in our modern pharmacy. One of these drugs, ephedra or ephedra synthia, is one that used to be available in drugstores, and it was used predominantly for people who had colds. So it was great as an expectorant. It would help you get rid of all that phlegm that you had in your lungs. But unfortunately, it was banned in the United States just a few years ago, because what they found is that dosages more than 32 milligrams per day really had some adverse events that would come along with it, including cardiovascular and brain-related diseases. However, the ephedra root, oftentimes called ma huangjian, is in traditional Chinese medicine is used as a distinct drug product from the plant. We tended to use the berries when we were using it to treat the lung conditions, but in traditional Chinese medicine, it's the root. And depending on how it's prepared and utilized, it can be used to treat things like asthma, cold, and even influenza without all of those negative adverse events. Ephedrine also had a really unique thing that happened once it became synthesized into a chemical. So once you take the plant extract and you understand what the chemical structure is, you can then synthesize it and create new and sometimes improved or sometimes not so improved products. Pseudoephedrine was the drug of drugs for nasal decongestants. In fact, today you have to get pseudoephedrine from behind the counter. You can't purchase it directly through the pharmacy yourself. But due to its properties, it was classified as an amphetamine. So it was a very strong stimulant. It's also one of those drugs that tends to be the precursor of something that's really illicit and sought after. And if you are interested in understanding more about that, I would recommend watching Breaking Bad. They have many episodes where they're trying to find pseudoephedrine to create their methamphetamine laboratory products. A lot of the companies that were looking at pseudoephedrine really started to reformulate their over-the-counter decongestants to try and use a less effective decongestant so it would pass through and not have to be put behind the counter and people could readily access it. But it just doesn't have the same oomph, the same strength that the pseudoephedrine does.
Excuse me, I've got a little coffee. All right. So one of the other questions that was submitted was, to what extent is the effect or effectiveness of traditional Asian medicines being researched now with scientific processes? A lot, actually. The interest in Chinese traditional medicine has been ongoing for a long time. You know, the natural products are really the origin for much of the current drugs. I mean, if you think about things like, pain meds came from opium. Digitalis came, provided digoxin, the colchicine. So many of the plants are really the origins of the modern medicine. So it is, and as everyone who's ever taken one of my classes or classes in regulatory science knows, drug discovery and development is very difficult. So the companies will try to find the therapeutic wherever they can find it. So if traditional medicines, traditional Chinese medicines could offer that, the nugget of gold for therapeutic discovery and development, they would love it. So if you look, there's what's in the pipeline. There's a review article looking at the characteristics of TCMs currently in clinical trials, looking at the clinicaltrials.gov database. And when you find in the next slide is that there are a number of trials, over 1,200 trials currently ongoing, everything that has to do with treatment, prevention, and other purposes. So there is definitely an increasing interest, and you can see the types of intervention in the next slide, where you can see, over 35%, the intervention is a herbal medicine, and then also there's a lot of interest in acupuncture. So if you go to the next one, if you look at over the last 16 years in that next slide, you can see there's an upward trend overall. So there is clearly an interest in looking at this field. So then one of the other question was, what about COVID? Are there interest in looking at traditional Chinese medicine for COVID treatment? And you can see from this review article, in fact, the answer is yes. And looking at the different clinical trial databases, you can see there were 169 trials that were identified. And if you go to the next one, you can see the kind of the notable products for prevention. There are 3 there for prevention, and if you go to the next one, there are a few for treatment. And the types of products, and I don't know all of them, and but you recognize some of the things, right? So some of them are just direct antivirals. So some of these molecules have some antiviral properties. Some of them are anti-inflammatory, and then some of them are addressing GI symptoms. So those are kind of broad areas that I was able to see. But there are a lot of things happening. But one of the things that the authors mentioned was that even though 169 trials are ongoing, and most of them actually started in China early first half of last year, the authors were skeptical whether all of them will actually finish. So now let's move on to acupuncture. As you saw, there are quite a number of clinical trials being conducted in acupuncture, and you or your family members or friends may have experienced acupuncture at one time or another. And so what are the effects of acupuncture on dementia, and overview of systematic reviews? So even FDA, you can see, even FDA is now proposing that doctors learn about acupuncture for pain management. So why is that? Because of the current opioid epidemic, right? So we're trying to see if we can move people away from opioid use, if they can, if there are alternative ways of managing people's pain. So even though FDA does not regulate acupuncture, I thought it was interesting that FDA is proposing that doctors learn acupuncture. So if you actually look at the results, there are mixed results with some promise. You can kind of see the different types of studies that were done with acupuncture. And so it'll be interesting to see. I don't know whether Alzheimer's was really the right indications to pursue with acupuncture. Oftentimes, I find people who are receiving acupuncture treatments are because of some sort of pain management. So I'd be interested to see if there are studies published with regards to acupuncture and pain.
So one of the things that we have to be very careful with when we're talking about these dietary supplements and food are the claims that we're making. We can't make very broad health claims. We can't say things like, this is medicine, or this will cure your, insert the name of your condition here. What we have to be very aware of is that the supplements that we are using can fall into one of these three categories that you see here. They can have health claims, nutrient claims, or structural functional claims. And this helps limit and restrict what the manufacturers are allowed to say in the labeling that they provide. As you can imagine, we can see that the enforcement of these claims as manufacturers attempt to position the products in terms of prevention or treatment or cures of disease, how this is impacted. And in this case, we're looking at is Alzheimer's disease, with 17 companies being sent warning letters, both in terms of the formal letter as well as online advisory letters, to really halt them from making claims about Alzheimer's that, to be honest, they really can't cash that check. They don't have the data necessary, and it's also not a drug. We also see things related to weight loss, sexual enhancement, bodybuilding. All of these are very popular, and oftentimes their labeling is a little imprecise, or they have deceptive labeling of the ingredients that pose potentially some health problems to consumers. We've also seen that there are issues related to staple herbs from TCM, including things like ginseng. In this case, there were many claims made towards the labeling information that was provided, both in terms of websites, but also in the product itself, that tended to imply the product was intended to be used predominantly as a drug, not as a supplement.
So one of our students, Kelsey Genda, who's on our research team, really took on an interest in dietary supplement regulatory landscape. And so she conducted a research into recalls and warning letters, exploring you can see on the next slide, exploring the FDA's freely available database, but it was kind of painstaking for her to actually go through year by year and sifting through all the warning letters, because you have warning letters for food and cosmetics and drugs, and then just picking up the ones for dietary supplement. And you can see on the next one, if you look at the recalls, the types of problems that the companies were running into. And the biggest, almost half of the recalls were because these dietary supplements contain drug. And remember in my earlier slides, I said a dietary supplement cannot contain a drug. If it contains drug, you are a drug. And then, so you can see that. And then in the next one, warning letters. They get warning letters because they're making disease claims. As Dr. Church said, they're not allowed to. They have manufacturing problems. They are misbranded or have labeling problems, as well as they contain drugs or they don't qualify as dietary supplements. So those are types of problems that we're seeing, which the public doesn't really understand, because even though this information is freely available on FDA website, it is how of all of you guys, I mean, I guess this is not really a good audience because many of you are my students, but how many of the lay public actually ever goes and looks through the FDA website?
So in summary, what can we really say about how do we merge these two? What we can say is that Western medicine is really focused on identifying the cause of disease and trying to provide interventional therapies to counteract it. Whereas Eastern medicine tends to focus on prevention of disease and support of the natural defenses against disease. So in our opinion, there is no reason why the two can't coexist as long as there's proper regulatory oversight, proper research, and proper use to ensure that the health and safety of the consumers are protected. We'd like to extend a special thanks to our hosts for inviting us to speak today. And in advance of tomorrow, we'd also like to wish everyone a Happy New Year. And at this time, we would like to open it up to questions. So if you have questions, feel free to raise your hand and I will unmute you to go ahead and ask your questions.
I think somebody has a hand up.
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, it's Kim. Hi, Kim.
Hi, Anju. Hi, Terry. Thank you so much for this. I had a bit of an odd question, maybe. You described traditional Chinese medicine as a supplement or as a food. What if the Chinese the Chinese medicine was used as a topical, but does not want to make drug claims? Is there a space for that? And I don't think we can call a food topical, but what's your opinion on that? And thank you for unmuting me.
I think you could say you're a cosmetic if you don't want to say you're a drug.
So
you could also go to the route of homeopathic medicine. So homeopathic medicine, you can see oftentimes you have a whole bunch of different plant ingredients, and they are not reviewed by the FDA. They go through the homeopathic pathway. And so that I've seen a lot of the traditional Chinese medicine ingredients being combined into homeopathic lotion or spray. But you also have things like massage oil, right? They don't say that you use it to soothe the muscle, but you're not claiming that it treats muscle pain. So you want, if you can find it, if you don't have any drug ingredient,
mm-hmm.
and it's not consumed orally,
mm-hmm.
okay, then you can look for cosmetic type of a path. Does that make sense, Kim?
It does. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Michael, one of our professors. Hello, Michael. Good evening.
Hello. Yeah, further to the previous question, by definition and by statute, a food and a dietary supplement must be for oral administration. And so, yeah, you could potentially call it a homeopathic, you could call it a cosmetic massage oil or something like that, but you got to be very, very careful about how you word things, because any kind of spurious claims, and FDA will say you're making drug claims and you can't get away with it. But
exactly.
People have tried to take things that they could be a dietary supplement and deliver them by routes other than the oral route, and FDA always shuts that down.
Exactly, because that's not diet.
Right.
So I had a professor, colleague of mine in another department, say, oh, I found this herb and I really, I think there is a great use for it. But I heard that, it takes 14 years and $2.6 billion if I want to make it into a drug. So I said, make it into a lotion.
Yeah. Well, but again, depending on what kind of claims you want to make or what you want to do with it,
you cannot. Yeah, exactly. You cannot make the claims. Right now, there are some problems. Right now, we all know there are some products that we see on TV all the time that is a lotion that is being that makes therapeutic claims, and it's not a drug.
Yeah, well, FDA does have a challenge trying to catch everything, and people get very creative. And as fast as they write warning letters, they try something else. So that is one of the challenges.
Exactly. Yeah, it's yeah, that's the thing, is that is one of the challenges with dietary supplement, because the dietary supplements are assumed to be safe until proven to be harmful. And so FDA, when FDA inspects and finds that the product has lead in it, or the product has Viagra in it, then they can send a warning letter. But in the meantime, how many people have actually consumed that product, right? So that's the challenge in terms of the FDA's current dietary supplement framework, that may not be adequately protecting the public from harm.
Right.
I would actually like to ask you a question, since I don't see any hands. Well, I'm so glad that you covered the part about traditional Chinese medicine for COVID treatment, because at the beginning of the pandemic, I've heard so many stories from China, especially from Wuhan, where people literally turn to their traditional Chinese doctors for medications in order to cure, because people were scared and then really have no access to anything outside the hospital, because all the hospitals were full. And so could you talk a bit more specifically, like give us some examples whether some of these actually were used in the United States?
Well, you know what? The interesting thing about the entire herbal medicine / dietary supplement field is it's a very trendy area. And so whatever that ails our society, you will find a rush into the marketplace for those indications. So when Ebola was on the news, all of a sudden we had herbal medications to protect against Ebola. And of course, FDA comes down hard whenever somebody is making those claims, but inevitably they do. And then of course, Zika was that. And then now, yes, there were a flurry of herbal medications and dietary supplements that claim to protect against COVID-19, and FDA had to actually send out a public announcement to say, there's nothing that really right now has been shown to be effective in treating or preventing COVID-19. So please be aware. And so that's and in China, I mean, in terms of turning toward traditional Chinese medicine is because they were trying to alleviate their symptoms, right? So in terms of pain, in terms of difficulty in breathing, and in terms of reducing fever, a lot of those traditional Chinese medicines have been used for those symptoms. So I'm not surprised that they turn to those treatments, and it is very likely that the patients received a benefit from that symptomatically.
I see. Well, thank you so much for your answer, and I don't see any other hands. So with that, I would just like to thank Unju and Terry for this fascinating talk, and it's such a timely topic. And I also wish to thank the audience for staying with us this afternoon, and also happy Chinese New Year to everybody. And please stay healthy and please stay safe. So I see you in the next event. Thank you again. Good evening.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.